Okay, so today we are going to be reviewing this book, Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix. Side note, this is actually my third attempt to do this review because, yeah, there were some issues along the way with the first two. So let's do this one more time and hopefully get it right this time. Alright, so if you have not seen my reviews before, I split them up into two sections. The first section is a spoiler-free section where I give you 3 pros and 3 cons of a book in a spoiler-free way. And the second section is my spoilery section where I can either rant or gush about all the things I want to talk about with the book in a spoilery way. So let's get right into this book and discuss the spoiler-free version of what I thought of Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. This is a book by J.K. Rowling and I gave it 5 stars. It is a young adult fantasy book. So the first thing that I need to discuss are my 3 cons for this book. Or maybe we'll make it 2 cons for this book. No, okay, maybe 1 con for this book. I can't do it. I can't give you any cons. This book was so amazing. There are 0 cons for this book. So let's move on to the pros, shall we? And the first pro I have for this book is J.K. Rowling's easy writing style. This is something that I've brought up in a couple of my Harry Potter reviews, and I think it's worth mentioning because having an easy-to-read writing style in any book makes a book not only easier to read, but makes it more enticing to pick up. There is a reason why so many people came back to or began to start reading when it came to this series, and one of the biggest reasons is because J.K. Rowling's writing style is really easy to read. It's not to say that her plots are simplistic. No, they're not. There's a lot that goes on in every book, and there's a ton that goes on in this book. In fact, this book is a tome and a half. It is 766 pages long, and there's a lot that happens in those 766 pages. But the writing style itself is very, very easily manageable and very easy to read. That is a massive, massive pro. My second pro for this book in my spoiler-free section is that so many big things happen. I'm going to try and keep this spoiler-free section as short as I possibly can because there is a lot to discuss in the spoiler section, as I'm sure you understand if you've read the book. If you haven't, know that going in. Know that you are going into, yes, one book, but you are going to come out having read so many different things. There are so many things that occur in this book, but there are so many big things that happen in this book, and that is an absolute pro as far as I'm concerned, because it's not just one thing that you're slowly working your way through as you get to the end of the book. There are so many big things that occur. My third pro for this book is the amazing revelations that come about at the end. There are some really big reveals that come at the end of this book that really set you up for books 6 and 7. So last week I finished reading book 4, Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, and that book came with its own reveals. But this book goes even further, and I feel that the conclusion of this book really sets us up not only for book 6, but also for book 7. So there are massive reveals at the end of this book, and that is a third pro for this book. So that brings us to the end of our spoiler-free section. If you're not going to be joining me for the spoiler version, I completely understand. Highly recommend you pick up this book. Highly recommend you pick up this series because it is just so much fun to read. If you love fantasy books, I'm pretty sure you'll love Harry Potter, the Harry Potter series in general. And if you have read the first 4 books in the Harry Potter series, I know you will love Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix because of just how good it is. I end up giving this book 5 stars. I had a wonderful time with it. And now I'm going to move on to my spoiler section. So a massive warning here. Spoiler, spoiler, spoiler. We're going into the spoiler section of this book right now. So being that this is my third attempt to do this review, I'm going to try and keep my thoughts as succinct as I possibly can because there is so much to discuss and I have run out of time in one of the earlier attempts that I did to record this review. So let's start off first of all talking about Dementors being in Little Whinging. This is shocking, to say the least. The only resident that we are aware of when you first read this book that lives in Little Whinging is Harry Potter. That is a wizard, sorry, is Harry Potter. Everyone else, that, as far as we know, is a muggle. So there's really no need for Dementors to be going to Little Whinging, and if anyone is not going to be doing anything, if there's anyone there that's not going to be doing anything wrong that is a wizard, it's going to be Harry Potter. So, I mean, there was no reason for Dementors to be there. Now, obviously, we get a reveal at the end of the book where Dolores Umbridge says that she's the one who sent the Dementors to Little Whinging, hoping to defeat Harry Potter, but obviously she didn't do enough research because had she done that, she would have found out what he did in Book 3 with Remus Lupin, training really hard to defeat Dementors. He can produce a Patronus. I'm sure she would have been very surprised when she heard him say that he can produce a Patronus at the trial. But back to the Dementors themselves, it was very surprising to have them there at Little Whinging, and then of course to have the introduction of Mrs. Fig being a squib, something that really shocked Harry because obviously she couldn't tell him, and he had spent time with her, and she had made the time he had spent with her very dull, so that the Dursleys would keep allowing him to, I guess, go over there whenever they were going out. But yes, very big scenes at the beginning of this book with those Dementors. So then we move on to all the letters that are coming in once Harry and Dudley get home, and because Harry drives the Dementors away successfully with his Patronus charm, and one of those letters is one from Ophelder Hopkirk saying that he has been expelled from Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. A very quick point I want to make in comparison to the film. I did not watch the film this time, but I've watched the films themselves many times before, is that in the film, this letter is kind of like a very nice version of a howler. I mean, it's a howler, but it's not a screaming howler, if that makes sense, with her saying that he's been expelled. In the book, it's not a howler at all. It is a standard letter. So that was creative liberty taken by the film. Obviously, then there are more letters that come through. I believe it's Mr. Weasley who writes Harry a letter saying that, you know, don't give up your wand, don't worry, you haven't been expelled, Dumbledore's going to sort this out. And then we find out Harry is going to have a trial because of the use of underage wizardry magic that he used to produce this Patronus charm. One thing that I have an issue with as far as Harry Potter lore is concerned, and the magical lore in this world is concerned, is the detection of underage wizard or witch or wizardry magic detection, because there doesn't seem to be any real way of knowing who is using magic at what time. For example, in the second book, it is Dobby that uses the hover charm on the cake, and yet Harry is given a warning because the Ministry thinks that he did this spell. So there's no real way of knowing who is casting a spell. They're just assuming because he's the only wizard that lives at number 4 Privet Drive that he could be the only one that could do the magic. So it's kind of weird. In this book, Harry Potter uses his magic to produce a Patronus to ward off Dementors. What he is doing is a magical version of self-defense. Clearly this is not picked up upon, because had it been picked up upon, I doubt that there would have been a trial at all, and I think he would have been absolutely okay with it. Hermione even makes the point, there's nothing they can do to you, you are defending yourself. You know, we have laws regarding self-defense, so it doesn't make sense, and I just wish that the detection of magic when it comes to underage witch and wizards would be much better than it currently is. So after the trial, we do get back to Hogwarts, but Dumbledore is not paying attention to Harry at all, and it's starting to annoy Harry quite a lot. Harry is very angry in this book, and there are a lot of hateful remarks from people who have read this book saying how hateful Harry is in this book, but I completely understand where he's coming from. No one's talking to him, no one's telling him what's going on while he's at home with the Dursleys. He's the one that saw Cedric die, he's the one who battled against Voldemort, so I completely understand why he is angry. But then we get back to Hogwarts, and the first thing we notice is that Hagrid isn't there anymore. Well, he isn't there at the moment, and Professor Grubbly Plank is going to be taking over care of magical creatures, which is obviously a big concern for Harry, Ron, and Hermione. Then, when Dumbledore introduces Professor Dolores Umbridge as the new Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher, she says her catchphrase, "Hem," and stands up and proceeds to give a speech saying how wonderful it is that all these faces are shining up at her and smiling back at her when no one really is. And she gives a speech very heavily suggesting that the Ministry of Magic are going to be interfering at Hogwarts, which Hermione picks up on. Once again, I want to celebrate my favourite character in this entire series, Hermione Granger, because for Harry and Ron, Professor Umbridge's speech goes right over their heads, but thank goodness they have Hermione there to explain what this means is that the Ministry is interfering at Hogwarts. So Harry doesn't like Umbridge. He doesn't know why, but that it's basically written in that way. He didn't know why he didn't like her. He just knew he didn't like her and he couldn't stand her. So brought forth the commencement of our time with Dolores Umbridge. So we get to the first class, I should say, with Umbridge for Defense Against the Dark Arts, and Harry is really upset to Hermione is really upset to find out that they're not going to be doing any practical work when it comes to Defense Against the Dark Arts. It's all going to be theory related, and she gets a bit upset about this. And then Harry, once baited, says the reason why they should be learning how to use defensive spells is because Lord Voldemort is back. Umbridge is clearly not happy about this and makes a big show of telling everyone in the class that they've all been led to believe that a Dark Lord has returned, and this is a big fat lie, which obviously makes Harry very, very, very upset. So Harry ends up in detention with Umbridge and that horrible quill that etches out carvings in his hand of "I must not tell lies." That is completely horrible, and she's such a malevolent, vicious, insidious character, Dolores Umbridge. So wrong. Now, Hermione does recommend that Harry go and talk to Dumbledore about this, but Harry says that Dumbledore has enough to be getting on with, but in his mind he's thinking, Dumbledore's not talking to me, why should I talk to him? And I completely understand why he didn't go and talk to Dumbledore. But one thing that surprises me is that Harry didn't go and tell McGonagall. One thing that becomes more and more clear as we progress through the book is that a lot of the teachers seem to be scared of Umbridge, but McGonagall does not seem to be scared or intimidated by her at all. We have some beautifully comical scenes anytime we have these two in the same room, and I'm surprised that Harry didn't think to go and talk to McGonagall about this. Now, maybe it could have been that McGonagall couldn't do anything. Maybe she would have said, "Look, Potter, you know what's going on here, so, maybe you just have to grin and bear it. What's a little bit of pain so we can try and get through whatever the heck's going on at the school." But I still think she would have been a great lifeline for him, and I'm really surprised that he didn't try and tell her what was going on. Fast tracking to Percy Weasley's letter, and this letter really surprised me because for the first 4 books in this series, I actually loved Percy. I had no problem with him. A lot of people tended to take what Ron was saying about Percy and just think of him as a prat and a git and all these other words, but I just thought Percy was a great guy, honestly. He was someone who was very highly ambitious at Hogwarts. He became, I believe, either a prefect or head boy or both, something like that. Then he ended up getting a job at the Ministry where he was very much doing whatever he had to do for Mr. Crouch, who was his boss. I had no issue with Percy. I thought he was a wonderful guy with great aspirations who ended up succeeding and finding a job at the ministry, and there was nothing wrong with him. But in this book, I have to concede, Percy Weasley has gone over to the dark side and started saying some horrible things about his family, accusing them of being traitors to the ministry and many other different bad things that he said to them. But none so bad as when he sent Ron a letter by our post saying congratulations on becoming a school prefect, which is something we haven't spoken about yet, so let's quickly talk about that. Ron and Hermione become prefects, and I'm really, really happy for Hermione, again being my favourite character in this book, and seeing her character growth. I definitely feel she deserved to be school prefect, and I don't think anyone could logically argue against Hermione being made school prefect. One thing that's really surprising, at least the first time I believe anyone reads this book, is that Ron is made a prefect instead of Harry. It doesn't seem to make any sense logically. Now, of course, at the end, Dumbledore explains to Harry that he had enough to be getting along with, and that's why he made Ron a prefect, but still, to me, I think Harry would have been able to cope with being a prefect, and I don't think that was the best decision to be made by Dumbledore, to be honest. So back to Percy's letter, and he's telling Ron that he's really proud of him, that he's become a prefect, and hopefully he would walk the same path that Percy had been walking, go on to become head boy, get a job at the Ministry of Magic, and, go against what Fred and George have been doing, and as they've been placing a really dark mark on the family and all these kind of things. But at the end of the letter, Percy is saying that Ron should not be sticking around Harry Potter anymore because Harry Potter's a bad influence and he does not want to get on the wrong side of the Ministry. It was a horrible letter, and it really dug Percy's grave, in my opinion, from where I was, with so totally for him, going into battle for Percy any time that anyone was against him in the first 4 books. But in this book, I have to admit defeat, Percy has gone over to the dark side. Of course, the next thing we need to discuss is the educational decrees. Little narcissist Professor Umbridge, any time that something happens that she doesn't like, she's sending a letter to Cornelius Fudge to get these decrees passed through so that things can work in her way and against anyone that she doesn't like, particularly Harry. One of the biggest decrees that she passes, in my opinion, is no teams or organizations can go ahead without permission of Dolores Umbridge. Unfortunately, this also includes Quidditch, which we don't really realise at the time until Angelina Johnson, who, since Oliver Wood has now left Hogwarts, has become the new Quidditch captain, makes the point to Harry, you realise this includes Quidditch, and we all have this moment of, oh yeah, it includes Quidditch, oh wow. So when she goes to ask if Gryffindor can be a team and continue on with Quidditch, Umbridge says no to start with, which is really annoying, and you can see that Umbridge exists for many reasons, but one of her biggest reasons that she is at Hogwarts is to make Harry Potter's life a living hell. She is such a narcissist. She is a character that you just love to hate. Eventually, though, the Gryffindor Quidditch team do get permission to play, and Harry, Fred, and George end up getting a lifetime ban from Umbridge because of a fight that occurs when Draco Malfoy instigates a fight by saying certain things about Harry and the Weasleys and all this sort of stuff, and they have a muggle fight, and Umbridge only seems to see what is going on with Harry and Fred and George and not what's going on with Malfoy. Typical Umbridge. I actually did some research to find out what house Professor Umbridge was in when she was at Hogwarts, and the speculation is that she was in Slytherin house. This doesn't surprise me at all, considering who she is as a character. So Harry, Fred, and George's brooms are also taken away from them, and they can't play in Quidditch anymore, and this really sets up a lot of different things that occur for the rest of the year as far as Quidditch is concerned. So now I want to talk about one of the best scenes in this book, at least for comic relief. So Harry is told by Umbridge in one of the classes, I don't remember which one, that he has with her for Defense Against the Dark Arts, to go and see Professor McGonagall because Umbridge has had enough of everything that he's doing in class. She writes a long note for McGonagall and Harry takes it to her. McGonagall starts reading the letter and then asks him questions like, did you shout at Professor Umbridge? And Harry says, yes. Did you tell her that the Dark Lord is back, that Voldemort is back? And Harry says, yes. Did you do this? Yes. Did you do that? Yes. Did you do this? Yes. Did you do that? Yes. And then McGonagall turns around and says, Have a biscuit, Potter. I mean, so love McGonagall. Have a biscuit, Potter. What? Have a biscuit. I wish they'd included more McGonagall scenes in the film adaptation of this book because she is so good. So one of the best things that happens for Hermione Granger is her character growth along this series. In books 3 and books 4, we already see her character start to grow from the little nerdy girl who, would much rather be killed than expelled, with that famous line, through to in book 3 when she punches Draco Malfoy and other things that she does along the way. In this book, one of the biggest out of character things that she does is she decides that she thinks it will be a good idea for whoever wants to learn Defense Against the Dark Arts in a practical way for Harry to teach them, because Umbridge is clearly not going to teach them the practical side of Defense Against the Dark Arts. It takes a while for us to get to the point where we're meeting everyone who is going to join the DA, known as Dumbledore's Army, and Harry gets more and more uncomfortable as time goes on until they get to the Room of Requirement, because he thinks he's just going to be teaching Ron and Hermione and doesn't even know if he wants to do that. Then when he agrees, all these people show up at the Hog's Head, and then Zacharias Smith, oh my gosh. I mean, I don't mind the twins. I don't love or hate them. I don't mind them. Generally, when characters are placed into a book just for comical relief, I'm not the number one fan of any of those characters. So I'm not Ron's biggest fan. I'm not Fred's biggest fan. I'm not George's biggest fan. But when they are thinking about things that they could do to Zacharias Smith to shut him up, I completely agree with them. But finally, the DA is formed and they start learning things from Harry in a practical way, and they all do really incredibly well. I need to mention here that Dobby actually is in this book. One thing that annoys me about the film, there are many things that do, but one thing that does is that Dobby is in this book, but again, he is not in the film. And same with Goblet of Fire. Dobby is in that book, but he's not in the film. But now let's go a step further. Kreacher, who I'm not spending too much time talking about because I don't like Kreacher. I understand why he is how he is. I agree with Hermione. I agree with Dumbledore. I get all that. But Kreacher is included in the film, but Dobby is not included in the film, and that really annoys me. Again, they take out Dobby and replace him with Neville. Dobby is the one who tells Harry about the Room of Requirement, where in the film, it is made to appear like Neville just stumbles upon the Room of Requirement from out of nowhere, which is not what happens at all. But I'm just really happy that Dobby came back in this book, because any chance I get to hang out with Dobby makes me really, really happy. So too, Weasley is our king. So I mentioned earlier how Harry, Fred and George are given a lifetime ban from the Gryffindor Quidditch team. They are replaced by other people, but also Oliver Wood no longer being there. As I said, Angelina Johnson is now the Quidditch captain. They needed to replace a keeper at the start of the year, and they replaced their keeper with Ron. Ron ends up being horrible. He knows it, everyone knows it, and the only person on the team who doesn't want Ron to quit is the captain, Angelina Johnson, who says she very much believes in him and that she knows his potential and that he'll do well, he just has to keep practicing. Well, the Slytherins end up creating this song called Weasley is our queen. Weasley is our queen. Weasley is our king. He always lets the quaffle in. Yeah. So, did not like this song at all, but once we get towards the end and the final, very final match, because somehow Gryffindor make it to the final Quidditch match, who knew that was going to happen? But anyway, Harry and Hermione have gone with Hagrid to see Grawp. I'm not going to talk about Grawp in this review because I just don't want to talk about Grawp that much at all, really. But while they're out doing that, Gryffindor end up winning the Quidditch Cup somehow. And when Harry and Hermione come back from the forest, they're hearing the song Weasley is our king, and they're getting really disappointed, but the words have changed to Weasley is our king. He didn't let the quaffle in. That's why Gryffindors all sing Weasley is our king. And so I love that the Gryffindors were able to turn that around. So when Hagrid finally returns, he tells Harry and Ron, I believe all of them, Harry, Ron and Hermione, where he's been off with Olympie, Madame Maxime, to go and see if they can recruit the Giants to be in the Order of the Phoenix, and that doesn't go that well. Honestly, I didn't care too much for this story. I am someone who prefers for an author to show and not tell. I understand why J.K. Rowling couldn't show us this, why she had to tell us this, and that's because Harry's not there. This book is all focused around Harry and Harry's own perspective. So if Harry's not there, we don't get to see it. I get that. But I don't like retellings, and so while I appreciate what Hagrid and Madame Maxime went through, I just, really didn't appreciate the story, that it was a retelling. So then we get on to Harry having his dream, nightmare, his link to Voldemort, where he is Nagini and he bites Mr. Weasley. This is a huge turning point because now we're actually seeing, even though Harry's been having all these dreams about the Department of Mysteries, we are now seeing how Harry is actually connected to Voldemort and, ends up in Voldemort's mind and all these kind of things. It all makes sense. So, eventually Harry ends up in Dumbledore's office and it all comes out that yes, Arthur Weasley has been bitten, and thanks to Harry, he ends up ultimately surviving. While Arthur Weasley is in hospital at St. Mungo's, we actually get to visit St. Mungo's, which I really appreciated because I love the new things that happen, every new thing we get to witness. So J.K. Rowling had done so much work on this world and didn't include everything in this world. There was so much she left out of the series, so any chance you get to see something new, I always think is a good thing, and it's such a shame they didn't include it in the film. From the mannequin that winks at them and lets them go in, through to, Tonks talking to the mannequin. Speaking of Tonks, love Tonks, by the way. Anyway, to getting into St. Mungo's, seeing that sign of all the different floors and all the different magical melodies that you'll find on those floors. I just found it so intriguing. Of course, when we're here, we also get to see Professor Lockhart, which was really cool because, Professor Lockhart still seems to be the same guy. Oh, I suppose you want my autograph. I mean, I think Ron even said something like, he hasn't changed much, has he? And it's like, yeah, true. We also get to see Neville and his grandmother and Neville's parents. The fact that they kept that out of the film is almost unforgivable because it explains so much about Neville with what his parents went through. It was just such a massive scene, and I'm so appreciative of the fact that we got to read this. So moving on to Clemency Lessons with Snape. Obviously, Harry doesn't want to have extra lessons with Snape. Who does? I certainly wouldn't, and I felt horrible for him that it had to be Snape. During these lessons, someone, I don't remember who, but either Ron or Hermione are making the point that maybe Snape is actually opening Harry's mind up even more for Voldemort, and I certainly thought that the first time I was reading this too, like, oh my god, Snape, we can't trust him, so, he clearly is. But the biggest moment to come out of the whole Clemency lessons that were going on was Harry seeing his father and Sirius and Lupin and Wormtail and the torture that they put onto Sirius Snape, Professor Snape, and back in the day, and also Harry's mum, Lily, and how she wasn't liking it. And it really changes Harry's thoughts about his father, because a lot of people say that he's a lot like his dad, and now he doesn't want to be like his dad anymore because his dad was this horrible torturer to Snape. And he even makes the point to Lupin saying, but he had said to, when Lily asked why he did it, didn't he say he only did it because it was merely the fact that Snape existed? So I understand what Harry is saying there. Lupin's trying to make this whole point of, well, we were kids, you can't take too much from that. And Harry says, but I'm the same age now that he was, and I would never do that. And it's true, Harry's not done anything like that to Malfoy. He doesn't like Malfoy, but he's never gone that far with Malfoy. So I completely understand where Harry was coming from. And to Rita Skeeter. So this whole thing, I love that it was reintroduced here after how things wrapped up in the Goblet of Fire, with Hermione saying that she found out Rita was an unregistered animagus and that she would, basically tell on her to the Ministry if she didn't stop writing. And then Hermione made Rita write Harry's interview about Voldemort's return, which really did so much and really helped people come to realise that Harry wasn't lying, because why would you lie about something like that? But anyway, so I really did appreciate that as well. To the scene where Trelawney is being kicked out of Hogwarts, I love that the film added this line, and it's the one time I'm going to say I prefer the film because it's not in the book, and it really surprised me that J.K. Rowling didn't come up with the line, the film did. How in the film, Umbridge says to McGonagall, "Is there something you'd like to say, dear?" And McGonagall says to her, "Oh, there are several things I would like to say." It's not in the book, and oh my god. So praise to the film for including that line, because again, it's another shining example of McGonagall and Umbridge. Another example of McGonagall and Umbridge is careers advice, when McGonagall is trying to talk to Harry about what sort of a career he wants to have, and Harry says he's thinking about being an aura, a dark wizard catcher. So McGonagall is talking to him normally, like, okay, if you want to do that, then you need to get these grades in these classes, and I would suggest you taking up this class, and da-da-da-da. And Dumbledore keeps interrupting, saying, "Hem." And finally, McGonagall, after ignoring her many times, turns around and says, "Would you like a cough drop, Dolores?" She says, "Oh, no, thank you, I'm totally fine, but da-da-da-da-da." And then, hem again, and McGonagall says, "Are you sure you wouldn't like a cough drop?" I love McGonagall so much, and the fact that she's standing up by the end of this meeting shouting, "Potter, I will make sure that I do everything in my power to make sure you are an aura." It was just such a great scene, and I have always loved McGonagall anyway, but again, this is why I don't understand why Harry didn't go to McGonagall and confide more in McGonagall than he actually does. So, 2 quick things to wrap this up. There's a lot that goes on in the Department of Mysteries, but I'm not going to talk about all those things because they all just lead up to Sirius dying, which is really, really, really sad. And my heart dropped the first time I read this because Harry finally had a father figure that he was going to end up living with, and now he can't because this guy is dead because he fell back through an archway. And it was very emotional the first time I read it. This time I was expecting it, so it wasn't as emotional. Also, the battle between Voldemort and Dumbledore, nowhere near as long as it is in the film, and obviously Voldemort tries to possess Harry, but he can't for too long because of all the love that Harry has inside of him. And finally, to conclude this, I want to talk about Dumbledore and Harry's conversation at the end of the book, because they're always having really good conversations, but this time Dumbledore finally decides he's going to tell Harry the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help him. And so he shows Professor Trelawney's prophecy, and it was just the biggest reveal ever. I love the Harry and Dumbledore conversations. And so we've run out of time, so I'm going to leave that there and let you guys go. Peace, blessings, and so much love. I post videos every Monday, Thursday, and Sunday, and I'll speak to you again soon. Mwah! Thank you for watching, and happy reading. Bye!